The rope was already tight against her neck when a cowboy swayed out of the midday sun and onto the square. Emma Carter stood on the wooden platform in the heart of Dry Creek, hands bound, dirt streaking her tear-stained face. The noose scratched her skin while Judge Henry Blackwell's voice carried through the gathering of 40 townsfolk. She was 23, a seamstress with no family, and in minutes she would die for a crime she hadn't committed. The judge read her sentence like scripture, declaring her guilty of stealing his wife's emerald necklace, a jewel worth more than most folks in Dry Creek would see in a lifetime. Emma had been hemming a gown in Mrs. Blackwell's parlor when it went missing. She was the only one there, the only suspect. But Emma knew better. She'd watched Mrs. Blackwell through the window that night, burying something in the garden. Nobody believed a poor orphan over the word of the judge's wife. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some averted their eyes. Others stared as if death was a show. Children pressed their noses to dusty windows. Dry Creek hadn't seen a hanging in 3 years, and Blackwell made sure this one would be remembered. Emma's knees shook as the executioner, Garrett Walsh, tested the trapdoor beneath her feet. The creak would nearly drown the pounding in her chest. She tried to pray, but found no words. How could God allow this? She'd never harmed anyone, never stolen a dime. She'd worked since 14, sewing 16 hours a day to pay for her tiny room above Miller's store. Now, a single lie was going to end her life. Judge Blackwell snapped his silver pocket watch shut and gave Garrett the nod. The executioner reached for the lever. That's when spurs clinked on the steps behind the platform, slow and deliberate. The newcomer's boots struck the wood with the rhythm of a man who'd had more whiskey than sleep. His black hat sat crooked, his brown duster stained from a trail. To most, he looked like another drifter who'd stumbled into the wrong town. But his bloodshot eyes missed nothing. The positioning of armed men, the fear on the young woman's face, the tension that clung to the air heavier than dust. "This is a legal proceeding," Blackwell barked. "Move along, cowboy, or I'll have you arrested for disturbing the peace." The stranger swayed, but didn't back down. His words were slurred, but loud enough for every ear in the square. "Legal? You call this legal? You're about to hang a girl who couldn't swat a fly. What did she do, Judge? Rob the whole territory?" The murmurs grew louder. The stranger's question cut through the silence like a whip, a question some of them had been afraid to ask. "She's a thief," Blackwell snapped. "Stole valuable property from my wife. The law is clear." "Your wife," the cowboy said with a bitter laugh. "Judge, jury, and victim all under the same roof. That's mighty convenient." Emma stared, hardly believing anyone would stand up for her, let alone a drunken stranger. No one had spoken for her in court. Not one voice had challenged the judge. But this man, whoever he was, wasn't afraid. "Move along before you join her," Blackwell warned, his hand resting on his revolver. The cowboy reached into his coat and pulled something that silenced the crowd. A tarnished badge, bent but unmistakable. The words were still clear enough: Deputy U.S. Marshal. Blackwell's face drained of color. His confident hand trembled just slightly on his weapon. The marshal tucked the badge away, his slur giving way to steel. "Now then, Judge, you were saying something about the law being clear." Emma felt hope flicker for the first time in days. Maybe God hadn't abandoned her after all. Henry Blackwell wasn't a man who backed down easily. Years of ruling Dry Creek with an iron fist had made him believe no one could touch him. But the stranger's badge rattled him, even if he tried to hide it. "This is a local matter," the judge said, voice tight. "Tried in a local court under local law. You've got no jurisdiction here, Marshal." The marshal, Jack McCall, tilted his head, still swaying a little, but his words cut through the air. "Local law, huh? Tell me, Judge, how long did this trial last? Who spoke for the girl? What evidence did you show besides your own word?" Blackwell hesitated. "She was caught red-handed. The necklace went missing while she was in my wife's parlor. That's proof enough." "Red-handed?" Jack's voice rose, sharp now, the drunken drawl fading away. "You mean you found it on her?" "Well, no," Blackwell stammered. But nothing." Jack took a half-step closer, and though his boots wobbled, there was danger in the way his hand brushed his coat. You're fixing to hang this girl because a necklace disappeared while she was sewing a dress? That's your evidence. The crowd murmured louder. Mrs. Patterson, the schoolteacher, whispered something to her husband. Old Tom Fletcher tugged his hat off and scratched his head. Even Sheriff Wade Morris shifted uneasily beside the platform. Jack's voice carried across the square, hard and clear now. Judge, I've seen better evidence at a church pie contest. Emma stared at him in disbelief. This stranger was saying everything her own lawyer hadn't, questions no one dared to ask. She could barely breathe, her heart thudding against the rope still looped around her neck. Blackwell's jaw tightened, his hand creeping closer to his gun. Marshal, I don't care what badge you carry. This girl is guilty, and she will hang. Jack reached slowly into his saddlebag. What he pulled out made the crowd gasp. A gold chain glinted in the sunlight. An emerald necklace, its stones flashing green fire. I found this about an hour ago, Jack announced, holding it high so everyone could see. Buried in the garden behind your house, Judge. Funny place for stolen property to turn up, don't you think? Blackwell's face went white. That's impossible. You're lying. Am I? Jack's bloodshot eyes locked on him, sober as a rifle shot. Your wife told the whole town this necklace was stolen from her jewelry box. But here it is, buried in your own dirt, wrapped in this. He held up a torn piece of silk from a woman's dress, one several women in the crowd instantly recognized as Mrs. Blackwell's finest gown. Voices rose in shock and anger. Tom Fletcher stepped forward, his weathered face creased with disgust. Judge, what's the meaning of this? Blackwell spat back, desperate now. This man's working with her. He planted it. Jack barked a laugh, sharp and bitter. I rode into town 20 minutes ago, Judge. Never seen this girl before in my life. But I've seen plenty of corrupt men hiding behind the law, and you reek like one. Sheriff Morris spoke up at last. If that necklace was in your garden, Judge. It wasn't in my garden. Blackwell roared, but his voice cracked. Mrs. Patterson's voice rang out clear. I saw Emma that night. She came to my house after work, crying. She said she'd seen something strange, but was scared to speak. Samuel Miller, the storekeeper, added, she told me the same thing. Said she'd witnessed something that could get her hurt. The crowd was turning. Blackwell could feel it, years of unchallenged authority slipping through his fingers. His face hardened. None of this matters. The trial is over. Sentence passed. Jack strode up the platform steps, moving with a steadiness that showed the whiskey was mostly an act. He started untying Emma's wrists. Step away from the prisoner. Blackwell drew his gun, pointing it squarely at Jack's chest. The square went deathly still. Not a soul moved. Even the children froze behind the glass. Jack looked at the judge, voice cold and clear now. I didn't ride into this town by accident. Henry, I came for you. The sudden shift in Jack's voice made the air feel heavy. Gone was the drawl of a man drunk on cheap whiskey. His words were sharp now, each one carrying weight. Emma stopped breathing for a moment, her pulse roaring in her ears. For 3 years, Jack said evenly, never looking away from the gun aimed at his chest, I've been tracking you. 3 years since you disappeared from Carson City with $50,000 of territorial funds. The crowd gasped as one. Even Sheriff Morris looked stunned. Henry Blackwell's face turned ashen. You're insane, he said, but his hand trembled on the revolver. I've been serving this town faithfully for 5 years. 5 years under a stolen name, Jack shot back. Your real name's Henry Blackstone. You were treasurer for the Nevada Territory until you ran west with government money and vanished. Emma's knees weakened. The noose still hung loose around her neck, but it no longer felt like the greatest danger in Dry Creek. The whole square was holding its breath. Mrs. Patterson spoke up again, her voice quivering but steady. Is this true? Have we been living under a criminal? Lies, Blackwell barked, though his voice had lost its power. This drunk is desperate to save his girl. Jack didn't flinch. I told you, Judge, I never saw her before today. But when I rode in and found you about to hang an innocent woman just to protect your wife, it made my job real easy. The crowd murmured louder. People stepped closer to the platform. Tom Fletcher climbed the steps, his old hands clenched into fists. "Judge, you'd better explain yourself." "This is a federal matter now," Jack said, "and I'm taking him in." "Like hell you are," Blackwell shouted, his revolver shaking as he tightened his grip. "I am the law here. I decide who lives and who dies." But the people weren't standing behind him anymore. Samuel Miller moved forward, his face hard. "Not anymore, you don't." Jack's hand hovered near his gun, calm but ready. His eyes locked on Blackwell's finger, white against the trigger. One wrong move would turn the square into a bloodbath. Then a voice cut through the tension, high, desperate, and breaking with fear. "Henry, stop." Every head turned as Elizabeth Blackwell came running from their house at the edge of the square, her expensive blue dress flying around her legs, hair coming undone. Tears streaked her powdered cheeks. "Get back inside, Elizabeth," Henry roared. But she kept running, gasping for breath, words spilling out like stones. "The girl knows about Rebecca." The name hit Henry Blackwell like a blow. His eyes widened. For just a moment, he looked like an old man who'd been carrying too many lies for too long. Jack seized on it. "Who's Rebecca, Judge?" Elizabeth scrambled up the platform steps, sobbing. "Rebecca's his first wife," she cried. "In Carson City. He told everyone here he was a widower, but Rebecca's alive. Everything he told you about his past was a lie." Emma found her voice for the first time in hours. "I saw letters," she whispered hoarsely. Then louder. "When I worked in your parlor, Mrs. Blackwell, I saw you reading letters signed, your loving wife, Rebecca. You saw me looking." Elizabeth nodded miserably. "I knew she'd figure out. Henry convinced me to frame her, to get rid of the problem." The judge's gun wavered, his arms sagging under the weight of his own secrets. "Elizabeth, please," he muttered, but she screamed back through her tears, "No, I already helped you steal. I already helped you build this life on lies. But I won't help you kill an innocent girl." Sheriff Morris stepped forward cautiously. "Henry, hand me the gun. It's over." The fight went out of the man. His revolver dropped into the sheriff's hand. Jack slipped the noose from Emma's neck and cut her bonds. Her legs gave way, and she crumpled onto the platform, sobbing with relief. "Thank you," she whispered to Jack. "How did you know where to look?" "I didn't," Jack said, helping her up gently. "But when I saw your wife wringing her hand to the window, I figured she'd buried evidence close to home." "Lucky guess." The square erupted in angry voices. Blackwell's years of power were crumbling in minutes. The sheriff placed both Blackwells under arrest. Elizabeth didn't resist. She even took Jack's arm as though relieved the nightmare was ending. But Jack knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The rope still hung from the beam above Emma, swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. She rubbed her raw wrists where the ropes had cut her skin. The crowd in Dry Creek wasn't celebrating her rescue. They were angry, confused, ashamed. Folks muttered to each other, their voices sharp and uneasy. Children clung to their mothers. The image of a noose waiting for an innocent girl had shaken something deep in everyone. Sheriff Wade Morris kept a firm grip on Henry Blackwell's arm as he led the disgraced judge down the steps. Elizabeth Blackwell followed without protest, eyes downcast, no trace of the proud woman who'd once ordered dresses from the finest stores in San Francisco. She looked relieved, almost as if being caught was easier than living with the lies. Jack McCall stayed on the platform, steady now, no trace of the drunk act that had fooled them all. He scanned the faces below, honest people who'd trusted the wrong man for too long. "Get her some water," he called softly. Samuel Miller hurried to fetch it while Emma sat trembling on the edge of the platform, trying to stop her hands from shaking. When Miller returned, Emma gripped the cup with both hands. She tried to speak, but her throat was too raw. Jack crouched down beside her. His voice dropped, so only she could hear. "You're safe now, ma'am. It's over." Emma shook her head weakly. "Over? How many others?" Jack's jaw tightened. He had been asking himself the same question ever since he rode into town. As dusk fell, the Blackwells sat in separate cells at the small jailhouse. The sheriff locked the doors himself, his face pale and drawn. "I'll wire the territorial capital," he told Jack. "They'll send men to take them to Carson City." Jack didn't answer right away. He'd been thinking about the people who'd never gotten a second chance like Emma Carter. Folks who didn't have someone riding into town at the right moment with the right badge. "We need to search their house," Jack said at last. If they framed one person, they framed more. The sheriff nodded grimly. "Let's do it." The search took hours. The Blackwell home, grand by Dry Creek standards, looked tidy at first glance, but Jack had learned a long time ago that corruption always left a paper trail. Under Henry's bed, they found a strong box stuffed with forged deeds, stolen cattle brands, falsified court records, and letters linking the judge to outlaws in 3 different territories. And behind a false panel in the wall, Jack found something worse, a leather journal in Henry's careful handwriting. "Morris, look at this." Jack's voice was tight with anger. The sheriff read over his shoulder, his expression hardening as page after page recorded bribes, verdicts bought and sold, innocent men and women railroaded to prison or the gallows. "Sweet Lord," Morris whispered. "How many people has he condemned?" Jack turned the pages with a rough hand. "At least 30 names I can see. Maybe more." He stopped at an entry that made his teeth clench. 2 years ago, a Mexican family accused of cattle rustling. Father and oldest son hanged. Mother and children sold into indentured servitude. Morris went pale. "The Hernandez family. I remember that case. Always thought something felt wrong." Jack slammed the journal shut. "This isn't just one bad verdict. This whole town's been run like a criminal enterprise." Across town, Emma sat in Miller's store, still wearing the dress she'd nearly died in. Mrs. Miller pressed a bowl of soup in her hands, but she couldn't stop shaking long enough to eat. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up," Emma whispered, "like I'm still in that cell, waiting to die." Mrs. Miller rested a comforting hand on hers. "You're safe now, dear. That monster can't hurt you anymore." But Emma's eyes brimmed with angry tears. "How many people weren't as lucky as me? How many walked to that platform and never came back down?" When Jack returned from the Blackwell house, he found Emma sitting alone on the porch of the store, staring at the square where the gallows still stood. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and red. "Miss Carter," Jack said, taking off his hat. "I came to tell you I'm sorry." She blinked at him. "Sorry? You saved my life. I should have been here sooner." Jack's voice was heavy. "I've been tracking that man for 3 years. I should have caught him before he hurt so many people." Emma shook her head softly. "You can't save everyone, Marshall, but you saved me, and now you can save the rest." Jack nodded, but the weight of lost lives settled on his shoulders like lead. He looked toward the jail, where Henry and Elizabeth Blackwell waited to face justice. For the first time in years, Dry Creek had a chance to breathe free air. But Jack knew this was just the beginning. There were 30 names in that journal, maybe more, 30 families who deserved answers. Night came slowly to Dry Creek, but no one felt at peace. The square was still full of whispers and angry talk. People walked home in small groups, looking over their shoulders, as if they were afraid of learning what else had been hidden from them. The hanging platform stood dark and empty, its ropes swaying in the warm wind like ghosts. At the jailhouse, Henry Blackwell sat slumped on a bench, his hands covering his face. His silver hair was messy, his fine clothes wrinkled from the day's events. In the next cell, Elizabeth Blackwell sat quietly, not crying anymore. She almost looked lighter, as if telling the truth had taken a burden off her. Sheriff Wade Morris wrote notes at his desk, while Jack McCall leaned against the wall, watching in silence. The journal they'd found lay open on the table between them, its pages filled with proof of every lie Henry had told. "Are we sure it's safe to keep them here overnight?" Morris asked. "Word's going to spread fast. Folks might try to take justice into their own hands." "They'll be safe," Jack said calmly. "These people are angry, not lawless. And tomorrow I'll ride with them to Carson City myself." The sheriff nodded, but his eyes stayed on the journal. "So many names," he murmured. "So many people we failed." Jack didn't answer. He couldn't stop thinking about those entries. Families cheated out of land, farmers thrown into prison, honest men hanged without cause. And all of it signed by a man who'd sworn to uphold the law. The next morning, the town woke early. People crowded into the square again, not to watch a hanging this time, but to see justice begin. The Blackwells were led from a jail under heavy guard. Some shouted at Henry. Others just looked away in disgust. Elizabeth walked with her head down, not resisting, answering every question the sheriff asked. Emma Carter stood at the edge of the crowd, pale and tired but free. She clutched a small bundle of her belongings, a few dresses, a pair of sewing scissors, and the last of her savings. She couldn't stay here. Every corner of Dry Creek held a memory she wanted to forget. The cold cell, the smell of the rope, the sound of Judge Blackwell's voice reading her death sentence. Jack saw her standing there. He walked over, removing his hat. Heading out already? Emma nodded. There's nothing left for me here. Maybe San Francisco. Maybe Denver. Somewhere I can start fresh. Jack looked at her for a moment. You'll be all right. You're stronger than you think. I wouldn't even be alive if not for you, Emma said softly. Her voice caught in her throat. Thank you, Marshal. Jack, he corrected gently. And you don't owe me thanks. Just live your life. That's thanks enough. For the first time since this nightmare began, Emma smiled. A small, real smile. What about you? She asked. Where do you go now? Jack glanced at the jail, then at the gallows still standing in the square. I'll stay a while. Help clean up the mess. Make sure the people who were wronged get some justice. The sheriff came over with his rifle slung over his shoulder. Territorial prosecutors coming next week, he told Jack. We'll be reviewing every case Blackwell touched. Could take months. Good, Jack said. Those families deserve answers. Henry Blackwell and his wife were loaded into a wagon and taken under guard to Carson City. No one cheered. No one waved. People just watched in silence as the pair who had ruled Dry Creek through fear were finally leaving. Later that day, Jack and Sheriff Morris returned to the Blackwell house to finish their search. Behind a locked door in the study, they found more than just money and documents. They found letters from powerful men in other towns, promises of favors, records of stolen land, and cattle sold to cover his tracks. Henry Blackwell hadn't just been a corrupt judge. He'd been part of a network of thieves wearing the badge of law. This is bigger than I thought, Jack muttered, tucking the letters into his coat. Bigger than this town, Morris agreed quietly. Back in the square, Emma lingered one last time, staring at the gallows. Though it smelled of sun and dust, but all she felt was the chill of death that had hung over her just a day ago. Samuel Miller joined her. You sure you don't want to stay? Folks here would take care of you. Emma shook her head. I need to go where no one knows me. Somewhere I can just sew dresses and not wonder who's watching. Miller nodded sadly. Safe travels, child. Emma turned her back on the square and walked down the dusty road out of town, her bundle small but her steps steady. The sun dipped low over Dry Creek, painting the sky orange and gold. Jack McCall sat outside the jail on the steps, smoking quietly as the townsfolk drifted home. The square was almost empty now, except for the gallows standing silent in the middle, a grim reminder of how close the town had come to murder in the name of law. Sheriff Wade Morris came out holding a stack of papers. Got the confessions written down, he said, lowering his voice. Henry broke after 2 hours. Told me everything. Theft, bribery, murder, even named the men who helped him. Jack took the cigarette from his lips and crushed it under his boot. That'll help clean house around here. But it won't bring back the people he sent to the rope. Morris looked down at the dirt street. Territorial marshals will sort through it. Families will get their land back. Those who were jailed will walk free. He paused. But the dead won't rise. Jack didn't answer. He knew that weight well. The weight of names he'd never forget, people he hadn't reached in time. He thought of the Hernandez family listed in Blackwell's journal. Their father and son hanged on false charges, their mother and children sold into indentured servitude. Any word from Carson City? Jack asked. Governor's sending a prosecutor and a commission, Morris said. They'll review every case. He hesitated, then added, they might want you to stay on. Help dig through all this. Jack looked out across the quiet square. I'll stay, he said simply, at least until this town can breathe again. The next morning, people gathered in the square again, this time with tools, not guns. Tom Fletcher brought a hammer. Samuel Miller brought a saw. Even Mrs. Patterson showed up with gloves. Without ceremony, They tore down the gallows plank by plank. The wood went into a pile, and that night they burned it in a bonfire so high it lit the hills for miles. Emma Carter wasn't there to see it. By then, she was miles away, heading east on the stagecoach, her bundle of belongings on her lap. She watched the road unroll before her, thinking of the platform, the noose, and the stranger who had saved her life. For the first time in years, she let herself imagine a future, a small sewing shop, maybe a room with a window and sunlight instead of shadows. Back in Dry Creek, Jack spent long days going through Henry Blackwell's papers with Morris. They found records of land stolen from widows, verdicts sold to the highest bidder, and letters showing the judge had been working with rustlers and swindlers across 3 territories. Jack sent reports to the Capitol every night. "You ever think about quitting?" Morris asked one evening as they worked by lamplight. "Every day," Jack said. "But then I run into someone like Henry Blackwell, and I remember why I can't." 3 hours later, Jack finished his last report for the night. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing tired eyes. "When a new judge comes, you ought to stay in that chair a while," he told Morris. "Me? I'm no judge," the sheriff said. "You're honest," Jack replied. "That's more than Henry Blackwell ever was. The rest you can learn." Weeks passed. Word came from the Capitol that every decision Blackwell had made would be reviewed. People who'd been robbed started to hope again. Families who'd lost everything came to town to tell their stories. Jack listened to each one, writing every name, every detail, promising justice would come. Henry Blackwell would spend the rest of his life in prison if the courts didn't hang him first. Elizabeth Blackwell would face charges too, but her full cooperation meant she'd likely be spared the rope. One evening, as the first stars came out, Jack sat on the porch of the jail. Morris joined him, tired but hopeful. "Think the town will recover?" the sheriff asked. Jack looked out at the street, where children were playing again for the first time in months. "Yeah," he said softly, "but it'll take time. Trust takes time." He thought of Emma, somewhere far away, starting over. He hoped she'd find peace, and he hoped the 30 names in that journal would find justice, one by one. 6 weeks passed, and Dry Creek began to feel like a different town. The gallows was gone. It would reduce to ashes that still clung faintly to the air after a hard rain. The square, once a place of fear, now filled with voices at sunset. Families talking, shopkeepers sweeping their steps, children running free without glancing over their shoulders. But the shadow of Henry Blackwell's years on the bench didn't disappear so easily. Every day, Jack McCall sat in the sheriff's office, stacks of files and letters piled around him. Farmers came from miles away with stories of stolen land, of loved ones jailed without trial, of verdicts that never made sense until now. Jack wrote each one down, his hands stiff from the work, but his jaw set with quiet anger. One evening, an old woman named Maria Hernandez walked into the office, leaning on a cane. Her dark eyes were tired, her hair streaked with gray, but she stood proud. "You're the man who brought the judge down," she said to Jack. "I just did my job, ma'am," Jack replied gently. "My husband and son were hanged for cattle theft," she said, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "They were innocent. My 2 youngest were sold to pay the court fines. I only found them last month. They're alive, but they're not the same." Jack's throat tightened. He'd read about her family in Blackwell's journal, but hearing her say it, seeing the pain on her face, was something paper couldn't capture. He rose and took her hand. "I swear to you, ma'am, those men who took your children will answer for it. And your husband and son, their names will be cleared." Maria nodded once, a tear sliding down her cheek. "That's all I want. Not revenge, just the truth." After she left, Wade Morris set his hat on the desk and blew out a breath. "That's the 3rd story like that this week. You gonna carry all that on your own, Jack?" Jack didn't answer right away. He stared at the empty doorway where Maria had stood. "Somebody has to," he said finally. "I owe it to every person Henry Blackwell hurt. To every person I didn't get to in time." Meanwhile, far from Dry Creek, Emma Carter was building a new life in Denver. She rented a small room above a bakery and opened a tiny shop with just one sewing machine and a table for cutting cloth. She worked long hours, but it was honest work peaceful work. When she passed strangers on the street, no one knew she'd once stood with a rope around her neck. Sometimes late at night, she'd wake sweating, heart racing, the sound of the trapdoor creaking in her dreams. But each morning she got up, dressed, and opened her shop, alive, free, and determined to make the most of it. Back in Dry Creek, the territorial prosecutor arrived with a stack of warrants and a team of men. Together with Jack and Morris, they went through every case Henry Blackwell had touched. 30 families were cleared. Stolen land was returned. Wrongful convictions were overturned. Henry Blackwell sat in a federal prison cell waiting for trial. Elizabeth Blackwell, who had told the truth at last, faced charges but was spared the noose. When Jack visited to question her one last time, she looked older, her fine clothes replaced by a plain prison dress. "I just wanted a better life," she whispered, eyes downcast. "I never thought it would end like this." "Better life built on lies never lasts," Jack said quietly. He wasn't cruel about it. He almost felt sorry for her, almost. Weeks rolled into months. Dry Creek began to heal. Honest men were put in charge of the courthouse. Wade Morris served as temporary judge, making fair rulings that earned respect. Jack stayed in town to help, though his badge kept him busy chasing down the men Henry Blackwell had worked with in neighboring counties. One by one, they were caught and brought to justice. One night, as Jack prepared to ride out after another lead, Morris asked him, "Why do you stay in this fight? You could walk away. Nobody blame you." Jack tightened his saddle straps and looked toward the quiet square where kids were chasing fireflies. "Because I can't stand watching good people get crushed by men like Henry Blackwell," he said. "And because that girl, Emma Carter, reminded me why I put this badge on in the first place. You don't let the law turn into a noose for the innocent." Morris gave a small nod. "You planning to settle down anywhere?" Jack smiled faintly. "Not yet. Still too much to do." He mounted up and rode into the night, the stars bright over the desert, his mind carrying every name from that journal like a weight he refused to set down. 6 months later, winter came to Dry Creek with a sharp wind that cut through the streets, but the town felt alive again. The courthouse was open and honest now. Wade Morris, still serving as temporary judge, had earned the people's trust by treating everyone fair, whether ranch hand or merchant. Farmers who'd lost their land were getting it back. Families torn apart by Henry Blackwell's false verdicts were coming home. Jack McCall stayed longer than he planned. The governor asked him to serve as territorial marshal for the entire region, and he accepted, not for the title, but because there was still work to do. Dozens of names from Blackwell's journal had led him to other towns, other corrupt men who thought their badges made them untouchable. Jack made sure they learned different. Henry Blackwell's trial in Carson City ended with a sentence he could not escape: life in federal prison if the hangman didn't take him first. Elizabeth Blackwell avoided the rope by telling the truth, but she spent her days in a cold cell, paying for her part in the crimes. In Denver, Emma Carter's shop grew busier by the month. She hired 2 young women to help her, girls who, like her, had no family and no one to look out for them. Emma made sure they never knew the kind of fear she'd felt on that wooden platform. She didn't speak often about Dry Creek, but sometimes at night she'd touch the scar on her neck where the rope had burned her skin and remember how close she'd come to death and how one stranger had refused to let it happen. Spring brought Jack back through Denver on his way to another assignment. He found Emma's shop by following the sound of the sewing machine and laughter through the open window. She looked different now, stronger, with a calm light in her eyes. When she saw him, she stopped mid-stitch and smiled. "Marshal McCall," she said. "Jack," he corrected, tipping his hat. "I just wanted to see how you're doing." Emma wiped her hands on her apron. "I'm alive. I'm happy. I owe you for both." Jack shook his head. "You don't owe me a thing. Just keep living." They talked for a while about Dry Creek, how the gallows had been torn down and burned, how the town was healing, how justice, real justice, had taken root there at last. When Jack finally stood to leave, Emma walked him to the door. "Will you ever stop chasing men like Henry Blackwell?" she asked. Jack looked down the busy street, then back at her. "When there aren't any left to chase." Emma smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "Then I guess you'll be wearing that badge a long time." He grinned faintly. "Reckon so." Jack rode out at sunrise the next morning, his horse kicking up frost from the cobblestones, the city waking around him. He carried no trophies, only the knowledge that an innocent girl was alive, a crooked judge was behind bars, and a town once ruled by fear now had hope. As the trail stretched out before him, Jack thought about everything he'd seen. Good people fooled by power, bad men using the law as a weapon, and how close justice had come to hanging beside Emma Carter. He understood something he'd always known but never said out loud. The law itself isn't good or bad. It's just a rope, and it matters whose hands are holding it. In honest hands, it can pull people to safety. In corrupt hands, it becomes a noose. That night, under a sky full of stars, Jack made himself a quiet promise. Never let fear silence the innocent. Never let power go unchecked. And never forget that courage isn't loud. It's steady, like a single voice speaking up in a crowd. Dry Creek would never forget either. They learned that real justice doesn't come from titles or fancy robes. It comes from people willing to stand up, even when their voice shakes, and say, "This isn't right." And in that truth lay the heart of the lesson. Power without honesty destroys. But courage, even from a stranger with a tarnished badge, can save a life, a town, and maybe something greater.